Hi. Wait, just, how do I do this? Watch me. Sorry. Ooh. All right. Thank you so much for inviting me. This is a really exciting conference. I haven't been to Active History before, but I'm loving it so far. It's blowing up on Twitter, I heard, so it's really exciting to be in this environment. As she mentioned, I'm a sociologist by training, but I do sociology of public memory, so this is what brings me here. And my research for the last many years actually has been on the social lives of monuments in Ottawa specifically. Just recently, this has become interesting to the broader world for reasons I'm sure you can figure out. So like Yahoo News is calling me and stuff. It's pretty exciting with the different monument controversies in Ottawa right now. What I'm going to talk about today is how I understand monuments working sort of in general, and how we can understand the ambivalence and the sort of very strong affective attachments that we have to monuments, not just in Ottawa, but in other places as well. My question that I began with my research was, why, if these urban objects are just like so easily dismissed as being forgotten or as being very ideological tools of the state, are we collectively so aroused when things happen at them? What is going on in these like moments of defacement where we are just outraged more than we are when buildings are torn down? Well, there is affective attachment to buildings when other things happen. So I'll begin here with like an image like this, which appeared in the Halifax newspaper last October after the shooting of the ceremonial guard of the War Memorial. And implicit in this image is what I think is our relationship to monuments in general. That these monuments are somehow dynamic, live witnesses, not just mementos of the past, but things that are very active in our present moments, as we see in this figure where the soldiers are climbing down from the pedestal. So I argue that monuments and acts of defacement, what they do is they offer moments where these are the sort of actualizations of our virtual, intangible relationships that are bottled up in monuments. So I'll just start with this story here of these guys, a unicorn and a lion that are guarding the Parliament buildings. They're right at the front. And you can't see here, but in 1985, some peace protesters drove up onto the hill, jumped out of their trucks with hacksaws, and attacked the Lions Paw and the unicorn shield, or something like that. And you can see the sort of seam of the wound that's been stitched up there. And I think this is a really interesting moment that represents a lot about what is embodied in these figures and also the response. Actually, what I'm going to suggest is that the responses to defacement really highlight what the monuments were doing in the first place, right? So we just pass by these every day, unicorns, magic and stuff. But actually in this moment, we can see a sort of contestation of the colonial logic that's underpinning this whole cradle of democracy in that is the Parliament buildings. And I think the seam is also really telling, because there are ways, and this speaks to all of our sort of moments of trying to repair problematic monuments. What do you do when you have really clearly racist monuments? Do you tear it down? Do you put up a plaque? How do you engage with all these multiple histories? So in this moment, the Dominion sculptor came and repaired it, and there was an intention to have a completely invisible seam, to just restore our sort of colonial relations. But we can see something there just a little bit. So I think this is a really interesting sort of way to start thinking about how defacement works. In today's in just the few minutes I have left, I'm going to talk about a few monuments David's already talked about. One, the Scout, which was at number 1, that's where Champlain is, but the Scout's now at number 2. And going to talk about number 4, which is the Canadian Tribute to Human Rights. It's down on Elgin Street, and its relationship to the War Memorial, which is number 3 there. So this is the monument that David was talking about, the monument to Champlain, and the Scout that was at its base for about 70 years, from the 1920s till 1996 when it was removed. And then it was unveiled again in Major Hills Park here. But what I see as the moment of defacement would have been the moment in 1996 when Ovid Mekwiti, the chief of the Assembly of First Nations, covered the Scout in blankets as a moment of protest. We can read this as a moment of defacement because it is a challenge to the logic that's being embodied in this monument, right? And as I said just previously, moments of defacement, what's really telling is not so much the moment, but the responses. That is how we can read trace these sort of intangible relationships that circulate through monuments. And at that moment, there was a big sort of public conversation about this monument. And some people agreed just completely with Mekwiti. Yes, it's offensive movement. A lot of people had a more nuanced response. Well, if we move it, then we're left with Champlain by himself. This sort of terra nullius narrative. This is equally problematic. That's what happened, actually. So we have that now. But there was also a group of people that really expressed clear affection for the monument as it is here, represented here, right? The Scout in this submissive, subservient position to Champlain. And they spoke about, there was one letter to the editor that I think is really sort of telling, where he says, I am a 60-year-old man, and I remember fondly going there as a child and sitting on the Scout and getting my photo taken. And this is just a foundational childhood memory, which is really interesting in so many ways, because a lot of cultural scholars have looked at how Indigenous peoples in Canada have been consistently produced to be childlike in the Canadian imaginary, right? The Scout is also he's more accessible than Champlain. It's impossible to climb on Champlain precisely because of this power dynamic that's here. So I would read, in this moment, the Scout sort of polished, worn knee as an actualization of what I'm calling imperial nostalgia in this moment, right? The commitment to this order of things expressed through the tangled memories of personal memories and the whole dominant discourses of indigeneity as childlike, which make this relationship possible. So this is how we can see sort of nostalgia at play, and how these moments of defacement allow us to access these really, really methodologically difficult to access intangible relationships to monuments. All right. The next monument I want to talk about just briefly is this monument here, which is the Canadian Tribute to Human Rights. And something that I didn't open with, which I intended to, but I approached paper writing in a different way for this session, was one of the key sort of theoretical ideas that has influenced my writing is Michael Taussig, the anthropologist, and his concept of the law of the base. And this harkens back to my Leonard Cohen title being too. And Taussig argues that monuments are always they're always also objects that can be toppled, right? So as soon as you put something on a pedestal, you're giving people a target to flip on its head, which people do, and there's so many in monument scholarship. There's so many examples of where this happens. So monuments are always already cracked, and we can see this with the Scout example. This was not just a place to express imperial nostalgia. This also was a very powerful and important place to produce questions about these types of representations and Indigenous relations in general, right? So this monument's not a monument just to colonial relations. It's an apt opportunity to challenge these. Okay, so the Canadian Tribute to Human Rights is really interesting in many ways. It was unveiled in 1990. Double checking that in my. It was unveiled in. Sorry, class. Not my class. Too much teaching. This is very embarrassing, but doesn't matter. It was unveiled post context of the Oka crisis, early 1990s. Should have just said that. So let me just tell you the history of this monument. There was a group of Polish Canadians, and they wanted to change the name of Daly Ave in Sandy Hill, Solidarność Ave, in solidarity with the Solidarność movement, which is something that I point out when people ask me about the Canadian, the Victims to Communism Monument. That idea was not approved by the city because Daly Ave is where the Polish embassy was, so it was seen as a fraught idea. So they poured their energies instead into a broader idea, which was building a monument to human rights in general. We'll support the Solidarność movement by thinking about just a monument to human rights. And the end result was this Canadian Tribute to Human Rights. And central to this, their design, was this path through it. And their original design also had a line from a Lech Wałęsa speech on the arch that says, here, we cherish the dignity and rights of every human being in every nation. To follow this path means to enhance the moral power of the all-embracing idea of human solidarity. That was going to be the original writing. That was changed to the first line of the UN Declaration of Human Rights, which was written by a Canadian, so that was made was understood to be more appropriate. So we have this central to the logic of this monument, a path. And I think this path is really, really provocative and really an excellent way to think about how monuments embody their own cracks, or how monuments have their own destabilizing logic within them. Because if you're familiar with Ottawa, this is one of the most active monuments in the city. This is the most visited monuments in the city because of the sort of politics inherent in its birth. It was meant to be not of any one sort of political persuasion, open, to groups on opposite sides of any conflict will meet here. So pro-life groups, anti-life groups, people meet here. So on the one hand, it really embodies this sense of this openness and a site for challenge. But on the other hand, the path, this sort of civilizing path, really produces a very specific logic in the Ottawa spatial narrative. So it can be read, for example, as a moment of linear history from the moment of Canada's birth at the War Memorial, which we see here. Here we have the soldiers who are fixed, and they are working towards peace and all this other sort of logic. But here, the soldiers have become transformed into these more mute or more mute, concrete, anthropomorphic figures, and the people walk through the path. So we've gone from these bronze soldiers to live beings, and we have this very strong narrative of a path. So on the one hand, the monument is this very dynamic site, but on the other hand, it produces a very specific narrative of Canada's birth through war and movement through history to this very specific idea of Canada's present state as a liberal, open democracy, which can be challenged when we think about how the monument worked in the context of the early 1990s when it was born. And there are a whole bunch of other interesting questions about the inclusion of indigeneity at this site as well. Okay, so I'll end there. Thank you.
Very good. Well, thank you to both of our panelists who are still here, and to David.